Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another class with WebYeshiva, the beginning of a new series of 4 classes on pre-Pesach series on Haggadot. And I thought I would speak about the oldest surviving Haggadot, the most beautiful Haggadot, most interesting Haggadot, and the saddest Haggadot. That's kind of in my head. I've got this one and the last one kind of planned out. I'm not sure, promising the middle ones, but we'll see how that goes anyway. So I suppose the takeaway or the point, I had this discussion on WhatsApp with somebody at work today. We kind of assume that the Haggadah, everyone has the same Haggadah, and the Haggadah has always been the same for everyone. But we also know that's not exactly true, because just like the Siddur, there is Ashkenaz and Edot Mizrach Sephardi and Yemenite and all sorts of different customs, which we all accept as valid. And even from one, if you and you sit around the table, unless you're all using the Maxwell House Haggadah, the same Haggadah, everyone has a different version of the words and a different order of some of the things. And we know that there's lots of different versions of the Haggadah, and yet they're all the same version of the Haggadah. So what I would like to do tonight, is to look at some 11th and 12th century Haggadot and just point out some of the differences to our Haggadot today, different traditions. And again, the Haggadah we have today is the one we're supposed to have today, is the one we're supposed to use today. I'm not advocating that we go back and use Rambam's Haggadah or Rav Sa'adia Gaon's Haggadah, but it's interesting to see how things have changed over time and how different traditions, particularly between the Babylonian tradition and the Eretz Yisrael tradition for the Haggadah Shel Pesach. And necessarily, I'm just going to pick a few highlights and try and put some things together, and we'll see how we get on. So here's some questions. How old are the oldest surviving Haggadot that we have? Where were they found? Where are they from? And how do they compare to modern Haggadot? Just kind of basic questions to get us thinking a little bit about this. So let's talk about, first of all, what's the oldest we could possibly have a Haggadah? Apart, assuming that in the future we dig up a Haggadah. Well, it can't be dated before the Exodus from Egypt, obviously. Right, because if the Exodus, maybe Avram Avinu had a Haggadah because it says he kept all the mitzvot, and we know that Lot served matzah when the angels came to visit him in Sdom. But we would be very suspect if somebody came along and discovered a Haggadah from the Bronze Age, from the time of Avram and Lot. So the earliest possible Haggadah, theoretically, would be from at least after the Exodus from Egypt. The truth is that we have no record of any seder in the desert, or any seder in the time of the 350 years of the Mishkan, or any seder in the time of the or any seder from the time of the first Beit HaMikdash. Now that's not to say they didn't keep seder. There was a mitzvah of Korban Pesach. Right, they would have presumably offered their Korban Pesach every year, and whether there was a Haggadah that went with it or not, we don't know, just because we don't have records. So if somebody discovered a record of a Seder from the first temple, it would not be impossible. But our Haggadah, in the version that we have it now, the earliest mention of any kind of Seder service is in the Mishnah. Right, and Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the 2nd century, or beginning of the 3rd century, but he's quoting Rabban Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel, presumably this is the Rabban Gamliel, the elder who was in the one of the 10 martyrs at the end of the second, who was in the temple, the very end of the second temple, after the structure of the second temple. No, I'm sorry. So this is Rabban Gamliel II in Yavne. Anyway, so he says, right, Kol Shelo Amar Shlosha Dvarim Elu Pesach Matzmor Lo Yatzei Dei Chovato. Anyone who hasn't said these three words or discussed these three things, the Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, has not done his duty. That's the earliest chronologically version of a seder or mention of a seder. So again, maybe that was his whole seder. They sat down with their Pesach and their Matzah and their Maror, and I think they wouldn't have had. I don't think they would have had a Korban Pesach. Pretty sure they would not have had a Korban Pesach after the destruction of the temple. They would not have had. But anyway, and then we have the discussion with Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, right? How many plagues there were, whether it was 10 or 50 or 200 or 250. So that's the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which is 135 CE. But the complete Haggadah, the latest rabbi mentioned in our version of the Haggadah is Rabbi Bar Eli, who is about 170. So that's our current version of Haggadah or something similar. That's the earliest it could be. The earliest, in fact, that we have is possibly a piece of Amram Gaon's Haggadah from about 860. What we have a full Haggadah of is Rav Sa'adia Gaon's Haggadah. We have his Siddur. Well, again, there's different manuscripts, different versions of it. Fundamentally, we have almost an entire Siddur, and Haggadah is part of the Siddur. So that is the 10th century. And then, not quite as early, but we have Rambam's Haggadah. Rambam lived from 1138 to 1204, and his Haggadah is not in a Siddur as such, but in his Hilchot Chametz or Matzah, in part of Mishnah Torah Yad HaChazakah, in his Halachot of Pesach, he goes through the Seder. So, and we'll see that Rav Sa'adia Gaon, for example, is coming from Bavel. That's the Babylonian. The Gaonim were the heads of the Jewish courts in Bavel. So he's got a Babylonian tradition, which builds on the Babylonian Talmud. Rambam possibly has a more Israeli tradition. He's based ultimately in Egypt, so we'll see some differences there. But if we go back to the earliest Haggadah that we have manuscript from, it comes from the Cairo Geniza. Now, we all know what the Cairo Geniza is. We'll talk about the Cairo Geniza. I just want to spend a couple of minutes to fully appreciate how incredible the discoveries of the Cairo Geniza is. It was discovered, the Cairo Geniza is the Geniza, the room where they buried old documents in what is called the Ben Ezra Synagogue in what is today Cairo, but at the time was Furstadt. And so I did not know this, but according to Wikipedia, according to local folklore, it is located on the site where baby Moses was found. Okay, interesting. It's also known as the Synagogue of the Palestinians or Jerusalemites. It's an Israeli tradition, even though it's in Egypt. And nowadays, the synagogue is not active. There's no, again, I haven't been there. If someone has been and visited and tells me otherwise, I'd be very happy. But it's a tourist site, a museum. The current building dates from the 1890s, but it's the third iteration of this shul, which goes back, I can't remember now, maybe I put it on the other side, but certainly goes back to the 1,000 years. And the things in the earlier Genizas were moved to the Geniza in this more modern building. This is a tradition, a shul that observed the teachings of the academies in Syria and Palestina. Rambam is the rabbi of this shul. In 1168, when he comes to Fustat, he lived there, he davened there. He was the Nagid, or the rabbi of the shul, and a lot of Rambam's documents. A small percentage of the total documents, but there's a lot of Rambam documents in the Cairo Geniza. So the Geniza, sorry, the 11th century, that's a mistake, I didn't mean that, but the building has got a 2-story high Geniza to store all these things. Again, this is really unusual that they would have such a big space. unusual they didn't bury their writings, and fortunate that the climate of Egypt is such that these documents are preserved. So documents were added and stored from the previous building, and so the oldest dated document is about 150 years older than the Geniza itself. 850 years worth of documents from, in the 6th century. These numbers don't add up, or whatever, the 6th century through to the 19th century. You have here a picture of Solomon Schechter before he became the famous Solomon Schechter in America. He was sitting in the Cairo Geniza going through the papers here, trying to learn, understand, figure out what was there. And it was discovered by Jacob Safir, who came, Romanian, who comes to Israel, becomes a rabbi. 1859, he goes to raise money for the reconstruction of the Churva synagogue in Jerusalem. The Churva synagogue is the ruined synagogue. It was called that because it was destroyed in 1721. Before that, it was called the Rambam synagogue because Ramban, Nachmanides, came to visit it in the 13th century. And then in 1948, it was blown up again, destroyed a second again by the Jordanians when they conquered the old city. And it was recently rebuilt. I guess, I don't know, last 5 to 10 years, it was rebuilt how it was before. Anyway, so he wants to go, 1859, wants to rebuild the Churva synagogue, goes around raising funds and pops up in Egypt, in Cairo, and he walks into the Ben Ezra shul and he looks down in the basement and he discovers this amazing Geniza, and he recognizes it's sat there for hundreds of years, and he's the first, I guess the first European or the first person to understand the value of this Geniza. So he writes about it in a book in 1874. Of course, the English come immediately to try and take everything that's not nailed down. So Elkanathan Adler comes, enters the Geniza, and purchased 25,000 documents. I think he just get paid for a job lot. And then when the synagogue was being rebuilt, they're just sitting there, and whatever. 1896, Solomon Schechter comes and starts the first academic investigation of the documents and arranged to have them moved from Cairo to various university libraries. There's a lot in Cambridge, in New York, in the JTS library, in Philadelphia. A lot of university libraries have different pieces of the Cairo Geniza, and even today, the 800,000 documents. They've not finished going through them all and cataloging everything, but there's a lot of online repositories and people calling for volunteers to go through and catalog things. So should you want to contribute to the knowledge of the Cairo Geniza, you can do so today from the comfort of your home. So that's where we find what is possibly the oldest, here's what I say, Cairo Geniza, a collection of some 400,000 Jewish manuscripts, in fact, a string of documents that were kept in the Geniza or stored with the Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat, Cairo. These manuscripts span the entire period of Middle East and North African and Andalusian Jewish history between the 6th and 19th centuries, comprise the largest, most diverse collection of medieval manuscripts in the world. They're written in various languages, especially Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic, on vellum and paper, papyrus and cloth, and as well as the Jewish text, the Bible, Talmud, rabbinic works. There also has a lot of economic and financial things that gives us history of life in Egypt at that time. So that is where we find JTS MS9 560, which may or may not be the oldest surviving Haggadah, surviving complete Haggadah. There is some discussion exactly as to when it is from, and whether the other ones are earlier, but it's possibly 10th century. Certainly, the latest will be as the beginning of the 11th century. And so, if it's not the earliest, it is certainly one of the earliest. You can go to the JTS website and find pictures of it. Although I'll be honest, I can't actually read anything that's written on most of these pictures, but the next slides each has a different page of this Haggadah. I hope, unless I took the wrong document entirely, but it did say it was Haggadah. So So again, amongst the library, the treasures in the library of, this is from the blurb on their website, among the press release, among the manuscript treasures housed in the library of the Jewish Theological Seminary is the rare Haggadah Codex JTS MS 9560. This early manuscript is one of the few surviving exemplars of the ancient Israeli seder rite. That rite disappeared as a result of the dislocations caused by the Crusades, and it was not rediscovered until the manuscript fragments of the Cairo Geniza came to light at the end of the 19th century. MS 9560 was probably deposited in that Geniza hundreds of years ago. Unlike most of the manuscript fragments found in the Cairo Geniza, this Haggadah is almost complete. Based on the writing style, it can be dated to the 10th or the first half of the 11th century. That makes it one of the earliest Hebrew manuscripts written on paper, and quite possibly the oldest surviving Haggadah. With its unskilled writing style, idiosyncratic spelling, and linguistic usage, the text bears witness to a layman's home ritual. And I mean, again, I can't read the text, but it does not look like the work of a scribe. There's no fancy lettering, no fancy decorations, and there's actually some places at the top here. It looks like there's some things crossed out, or no, I maybe I deleted that. But he's put in additions over here, trying to squeeze in things that didn't quite fit. So it looks like somebody may have written this for themselves, for their family, for their own Haggadah. Now, when we talk about Israeli versus Babylonian, again, there's after the destruction. This is not to be confused with the Babylon of the Babylonian exile, right, which was between the first and second temples. After the Babylonian exile, when the Jews came back to Israel, the majority stayed in Bavel. Only a few came back to Israel. But I don't think we have any traditions from those who stayed in Bavel at the time, or at least the traditions they had we know from hundreds of years later. So after the Mishnaic period, after Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, is when we find the flourishing of the community in Bavel, with Rav, who was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, went to Bavel, and Shmuel, who was from Bavel, and they set up yeshivas there. And from the 3rd century right through until the 8th or 9th century, Bavel was the largest Jewish center. The rabbis of Bavel were making rulings for not only there, for a large part of the world. And the Babylonian Talmud was written there, and most of the halacha and customs and ideas that we have nowadays come from that Babylonian tradition. But there was also an Israeli tradition by the people who stayed in Israel, people who wrote the Yerushalmi Talmud, the people who wrote the Midrashim, many of the Bereshit Rabbah and the Tosefta and the Mechilta. Those are Israeli documents. And so the claim is that that tradition was wiped out during the Crusades. It may have moved a bit to Rome, made the foundation of the Italian tradition. And there are some people today who are trying to recreate, right, in modern Israel, try and recreate that old Israeli tradition. And there are Israeli Sidurim and things like that. I'm not going to that, but just curious to see some of these differences. And you could argue, people have argued, that this document is not a learned document, right? Not written by a rabbi. It's written by somebody for their home, and therefore it's not reliable. And also, there may be pieces missing. So if I say this section is missing, that might just be because we haven't found it. So a lot of this is conjecture, but I'm going to go for it anyway, and we'll see soon that Rav Sa'adia Gaon, Rav Sa'adia Gaon thought that a Haggadah that looked like this was the work of the Karaites. But I think that's probably because he didn't know what an Israeli Haggadah would look like, and he thought anything different must be treif. So I'm going to pretend this is a document we can study from, and even if not, it's at least it's interesting. He doesn't begin, but he has in the Haggadah, the section of Biyad Chazakah, right? We have in the Haggadah, we take a verse and we multiply it and darshan it and come out with all sorts of things. So Biyad Chazakah says Shtaim. That means 2 plagues. Bizrana Triya Shtaim, B'Mara Gadol Shtaim, Shtaim B'Otot Shtaim B'Moftim Shtaim. So 5 words, each of them means 2. Elu Eser Makot. These are the 10 plagues. Shavia Makom Barachu Al Mitzrayim B'Mitzrayim. Right, that the God brought on the omnipresent brought on the Egyptians in Egypt. And they are Adam, Tzvadei Akinim, Arav Dev, Shkrin, Barad, Arbeh Choshech, Makat Bechorot. Those are the 10 plagues. Rabbi Yehuda Hayano Ten Bem Siman. Rabbi Yehuda would give him a siman. Datzach Chadash Ba'achav. If you just read that, you say, this is 1,000 years old. This is quite similar to what I do at my seder. Right? I also take the verse and I learn different things from it, and then I list the 10 plagues, and then I have Rabbi Yehuda giving this mnemonic, 3 signs. But now if we compare it to what we actually do in our Haggadah and what's missing, we say that's the same verse. And we say Yad Chazakah Zoa Dever. Right? We don't say Yad Chazakah is 2 plagues. No, it is the pestilence. So when it talks about the plague of pestilence, it says Yad Hashem, right? The hand of God, pestilence on all the animals, and we do that, and then we go on to the next. And I just kind of shortened it because this goes on for about 5 pages of the different things that we learn from this verse, on and on and on, and then we go to Rabbi Yehuda Hayanoten Bem Simanim Datzach Chadash Ba'achav, the mnemonic from Rabbi Yehuda, and then we say in our Haggadahs, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer Minayin Ata Omer Shelakum Mitzrayim 10 Makot, V'Alayam Laku 50 Makot. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, how do you know there were 10 plagues in Egypt and 50 plagues on the sea, Mitzrayim, etc., etc. And then we go, Rabbi Akiva says, and another few pages, and then we have we sing all of Dayenu, and then we say Alachat Kama V'Kama, and then we come to Rabban Gamliel. Whereas our Haggadah from the Cairo Geniza just jumps straight to Rabban Gamliel. Kol Shelo Amar Shloshah Dvarim Elu B'Pesach Le'etzeh Yidei Chovato, right? Pesach Matzah Marorim. So they've skipped almost all of the drashot, where they take, where the rabbis of the Haggadah take a verse and a word from a verse and then learn a whole piece out of it, which is, right, we say, Kol Hamrabel Saper Harez Mishubach, right, the more you can say, the more praiseworthy it is. We have it codified in our Haggadah. The author of this Haggadah did not have it codified, did not have a set midrash that he said. His seder would have taken a fraction of the time of our seders, because he just goes straight into Rabban Gamliel. But when we get there, it's kind of pretty similar to what we say, right? Rabban Gamliel Omer, Kol Shelo Amar Shloshah Dvarim Elu Pesach Le'etzeh Yidei Chovato. That's actually a quote from the Mishnah in Pesachim. Anyone who doesn't say these 3 things has not fulfilled his obligation. Pesach Matzah Marorim, Pesach Shepasach HaMakom Baruch Hu Al Batei Bnei Yisrael B'Mitzrayim. Pesach, why do we eat the Korban Paschal sacrifice? Because God passed over the houses of the Jews, Bnei Israel, in Egypt. When he smote the Egyptians and saved our lives, and everybody bowed down. I'm sorry about the spacing. I got I got Claude AI to do the OCR here, which saved me so much time that I didn't have to type it myself. And it did a better job than I would have done, but the spacing got all messed up and I didn't fix it. So why do we eat matzah? The dough of our ancestors did not have time to rise before they were redeemed. And it goes on basically the same as our Haggadah today does. So on the one hand, it's quite different and it's much shorter and leaves out a whole bunch of things. On the other hand, it's quite remarkable how similar it is from such a long time ago. Rav Sa'adia Gaon. On the right here, I've just put a bit of a bio about him. So he was the head of Surah Academy in Lower Mesopotamia, in Bavel, from 857 to 865 for these 10 years. He is responsible for more written response to queries posed to him by world Jewry than any of his predecessors, and maintained close contact with the Jews of Andalusia, which is now Spain and Portugal. So there's letters going back and forth from Bavel to Spain, not so much to Ashkenaz, to France and Germany and England and Northern Europe, and also not to Italy. Those are all different traditions and customs, but the Babylonian custom is definitely more similar to the Sephardi of today, which grew out of of Spain and Portugal. Now, it's unclear when Karaites began, or at least it's unclear to me because I don't know enough about them. In the time of the Mishnah, there was, and I'll talk about this when I get to the Zugot, there were the Tzedukim and the Baitusim, the Sadducees and the Bethusians, I don't know how to say that, who rejected the oral law and only followed the written law, and the Samaritans, the Saddukis, the Sadducees, ended up controlling the temple, whatever. Again, I'll talk about that when I get to the Zugot. They basically died out with the destruction of the Second Temple. At some point after that, the Karaite movement arose, who also approximately didn't believe in the oral law, but only the written law. And there are still Karaites today. There's a Karaite synagogue in the old city of Jerusalem. I knew a Karaite family in Leeds. And they're not the same as the Sadducees, but they go back a long way. And the Gaonim in Bavel spent quite a bit of time denouncing the Karaites, rejecting the Karaites, and separating and saying anyone who's a Karaite should be excommunicated. That was the challenge of that time, of those few hundred years. Even Rambam writes against the Karaites in the 12th century. So anyway, so there's a lot of Gaonim talking about against Karaites, and Rav Sa'adia Gaon seems to believe that anyone who doesn't have his version of the Haggadah is a Karaite. Now that may be true. I don't know, but it may also not be true and be because of his, because he wasn't familiar with this other tradition. So he writes, and I think it's in a letter. I don't know where the original source of this is, but he's Misha Amar b'Kiddush al Pesach. When you're saying Kiddush, if you say Asher Kiddush Yisrael, and you don't say Mashmit in Mashitzivanu, right? And so if he doesn't, if he leaves out right and commands us, similarly, Eno Mer Avadim Hayinu, if he doesn't say we were slaves to Pharaoh, Eno Mer Mitchila, and he doesn't say in the beginning our ancestors were idol worshippers, Elomer Vayom Yeshua, and he just jumps straight to Joshua, all right, Psuke Kamot Shehen, Ve'eno Mer Midrasha, and he doesn't say the Midrashim that I just went through about the 5 and the 10 plagues and the 50 plagues and the 200 and the 250 and all of that other kind of things. And Klo Omer ben Gamliel V'Omer Asher Galnu V'Chazil. I don't think it's a typo. So if he doesn't say, he just jumps straight to Rabban Gamliel, which is again what this Haggadah from the Cairo Geniza does. So this is great astonishment is how Claude translated it. What he's really saying is this is not what we do. Right? He didn't. Not only did he not fulfill the obligation of seder if he did this abbreviated version of the Haggadah, someone who does such a seder is a heretic, and he should be excommunicated. He's a kofer. He denies the words of the rabbis, right? Meaning he's a carrot. Mishnah Talmud Chayavin Kol Kilot etc., and everyone has to excommunicate him. So again, this Haggadah that was found in this Haggadah was may be Karaite, but there's a lot of people who've studied it who think that in fact it is authentic. So now I want to go through three different parts of the seder and just look at some differences from it. Sorry, can you give me 1 second to just check this work thing? Sorry, 1 second. Yes, this. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's look at Halach Ma'anya, which is how our Seder begins, basically. Let's look at different versions. So Rashbat, Rav Shimon Jiran, says, Zot HaPiska lo nizkeret b'shum makom midivrei Chazal. This sentence that we begin with, this not sentence, few sentences, is not mentioned anywhere in the words of the rabbis, la b'Talmud, la b'Midrash, not in the Talmud, not in the Midrash. So the source for it is the Haggadah. Okay, so the Mishnah in Pesachim. It's not the Mishnah in Pesachim, is it? This is what we have in our Haggadah nowadays, right? We say halach ma'anya de'achalo avatana ba'ara de'mitzrayim, right? This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Kol dechvin yeti v'yechol, anyone who is hungry, come and eat. Kol detzarech yeti v'yifsach, anyone who needs should come and join our Pesach. Hashata hacha, now we're here, l'shana haba ba'arat Israel, next year in the land of Israel. Hashta avte, now we are slaves, l'shana haba b'nei chorin, next year we will be free. Let me just point out a couple of inconsistencies with this. Again, it's not the Mishnah Pesachim at all. So, bread affliction, eat in Egypt. I mean, we didn't eat in Egypt. Right? We ate. The reason we eat it is because we left Egypt, but that's fine. Anyone who's hungry, come and eat. Sure, why not? Except that we've already said Kiddush, so anyone who comes to eat now has missed out. We've started without them already. We should have said it when we were still in shul, before we came home and sat round the table, or at least we could have opened our doors like we do later on for Elio Navit, so someone can hear, right? But the really problematic thing, anyone who needs should come and join our Pesach. So presumably, because we're saying we're not in Israel, this was written after the destruction of the temple, when there wouldn't have been a Korban Pesach, and Korban Pesach can only be eaten by people who put their names down for it, who were counted for it before it was slaughtered. You can't suddenly start sharing it with more people who weren't part of the group from the beginning. So this whole idea of anyone who needs come and join my Pesach, A, there was no Pesach, and B, if there was, they couldn't have joined it. It's a very strange piece. It's also in Aramaic, when the rest of the Haggadah is basically in Hebrew. So it's very strange. So when the Rashbat says there's no source for it, I understand why there's no, right? It's very strange. This is how Rav Sa'adia Gaon deals with it in his Haggadah. He says, Hashata hacha, this year we are here. The Shana ba'arat Israel, next year in Israel. He's writing this from Bavel, right? Hashata avde, this year we are slaves. The Shana b'nei chorin, next year we'll be free. Kol dechvin yeti v'yechol, anyone who is hungry should come and eat. Kol detzarech yesi v'yifsach, anyone who needs should come and join our Pesach. So it's basically the same ideas and almost the same words, but the order is flipped. We're not starting with come and join us. We're starting as we're stuck in exile and we're slaves. Rambam in his Hilchot Chametz Motzah has more similar to what we have, but he starts off with Bevhilu Yatzanu Mitzrayim. We left Egypt in a hurry, in behala, in haste, Claude translated it as frenzy. Right. No, sorry, no, that's not Claude. That's from whatever the word from Sefaria. We left Egypt in a hurry. And that's a weird Hebrew introduction to Halach Ma'anya Dachalavatana Ba'ardim Mitzrayim. It doesn't seem to have any connection to what came later, especially as it shouldn't be the bread that we ate in Egypt, then it should be the bread we ate when we left Egypt because we left in a hurry. Anyone who's hungry, come and eat. Anyone who needs a korban pesach, right? He spells out explicitly, which makes it very problematic. Shata Hachad, that now this year here, Shana Baba Israel, next year in Israel, Shata Hada Avde, this year we are slaves, Shata Hatatia, in the coming year we'll be free. So that's a slight difference in something which we kind of take for granted. That's the bit where we're still awake and we haven't drunk too much wine, so we remember that, but it's wasn't always said in the same way. Manish Tana. I wish you could have seen my daughter's face when I showed her what some of these other versions of Manish Tana. Everybody knows there's 4 questions, right? I don't need to tell you what they are. So let's look at some. Let's start with this is the Mishnah Pesachim, right? The Mishnah, or at least the version of the Mishnah that is in the. Sorry, I'm just catching up on. Yeah, so I mean, yes. So Lynn suggests that Yifsach doesn't mean join the Korban Pesach, but just means join in and eat with us. The new grain won't be ready till the next day, right, on the 16th of Nisan. But I think you're probably right. But in the words of Rambam, he says explicitly, if I just go back to that, Rambam says explicitly, Kol detzarch Pesach, anyone who needs a Korban Pesach, Yesiv Yifsach, should come and join our Pesach. So it's not going to work for that. And it's just a strange way of saying it. Anyway, the version of the Mishnah that's in the Babylonian Talmud says as follows. The last chapter of Pesachim really goes through the order of the seder. The first 9 chapters, not all of them, many of them are about preparing for Pesach, cleaning the house and kashering and what have you. Kana ben shoel aviv. Here the son or the child asks his father. V'im ein dad beben, and if the child doesn't have the intellect to ask, aviv melamdo, his father teaches him. He says, Manish tana halayla ze mikol halaylot. How is this night different from all other nights? Shebechol halaylot anu ochlim chametz u'matzah. On all nights we eat chametz or matzah. Halayla ze kolo matzah. This night it's all matzah. Shebechol halaylot anu ochlim shar yirakot. I try and remember the order, right? Order here. First thing is chametz u'matzah. Shebechol anu ochlim shar yirakot. Every other night we eat other vegetables. Halayla ze marot. Tonight we eat bitter herbs. Shebechol anu ochlim basar tzli shluku mevushal. Now this one's not how you have it in your Haggadah, probably. All other nights we eat meat which is roasted or boiled or cooked. Halayla ze kulot tzli. Tonight we only eat roast meat. Now in the time of the temple, when there was a Korban Pesach, even that's not true, but the Korban Pesach itself had to be roasted. Couldn't be cooked or boiled or fried or anything else, had to be roasted. The Mishnah is written after the destruction of the temple, when they didn't have the Korban Pesach. And so it seems that they had a custom to eat roasted meat as a reminder of the Korban Pesach they would have eaten when the temple was standing. There are some communities who have that tradition nowadays to have roasted meat. There is a widespread custom to not have roasted meat on Seder night, so that we don't think we're doing a Korban Pesach and get confused and end up eating sacrificial meat outside the temple. So anyway, when they wrote, the author of this Mishnah points out that that it's only roast. And the reason we don't say that in our Manish Tana is because we don't eat only roast meat on Seder night. Shebechol halot anu matblim pam achad. On all the nights we dip once. Halay zeh shtei pamim. Tonight we dip twice. Now, well, I guess we'll look at the other versions. But this whole thing, every other night we don't dip once, right? We don't. I mean, I don't dip every time I have a meal. I don't dip something. But now we dip twice, right? We dip once the carapace into salt water, and once we dip the marrow into charoset. Okay. Based on the knowledge of the child, the father teaches, begins with embarrassment, with shame, and ends with praise. And he goes through the whole parsha of my father was a wandering Aramean, or my father was an Aramean tried to destroy him, however you translate Aramea Aved Avi, until he finishes the whole parsha. So the 4 questions: matzah, maror, meat, and dipping is the order. If we look at the Yerushalmi, the very same Mishnah, which should be identical, but in the Yerushalmi it's different. It says, Mazgulo kos sheni, v'kana ben shoel, pour the second cup. Here the son asks him, ein dad b'ben lishol aviv melamdo. If the child can't ask, the father teaches. Ma nishtana halayla zeh mikol halaylot. How is this night different? Shebechol halaylot anu matbelim pam achat. All other nights we dip once. V'halayla zeh shtei pamim, each night we dip twice. So we're starting with the dipping. Interesting. Shebechol halaylot anu ochlim chametz u'matzah la'ezeh kol matzah. Now we go to matzah. All the nights we eat chametz u'matzah, not only matzah. And shebechol halaylot ochlim basar tzli shlokim u'shal la'ezeh kol tzli. We only eat roasted meat. The 4th question is missing, right? The question about only eating maror is missing. Possibly, I don't remember who said this, but possibly because dipping was really dipping the maror, right? You dipped the maror in the charoset. That was what the whole dipping was initially, and then I mean the carapace was lettuce. The lettuce was the bitter herbs. You tip the bitter herbs. So when you're talking about dipping, you're also talking about maror at the same time. And then gradually they stopped using lettuce and they started using other things. They made maror something different, and they had to dip twice. Carapace, it became a separate thing. But anyway, Babylonian Israeli. The Babylonians have 4 questions. The Israelis have 3 questions, and they're manishta. That ruins the Arabic Kushiot, or the whatever the different, we call the 4 questions, don't we? Sa'adia Gaon in his seder, manishta halal azim mikolelot. So I showed this to my daughter. She's like, "What? You can't say that. That's all right." Okay. Manishta halal azim mikolelot. Shebechol halalot ein anu matbelim. On all the nights we don't dip at all, right? Our version we dip once every night. He doesn't dip at all. V'alayla zeh matbilin. Tonight we do dip. Now it's not once and twice. It's not dipping and yes dipping. And again, we're starting with the dipping. Shebechol halalot anu ochlein chametz u'matzah. Halal zeh kol matzah. All the nights we eat leaven or chametz or matzah. Tonight only matzah. Shebechol halalot anu ochlein shai yarakot. Halal zeh marim. Tonight we only eat bitter herbs. And he's added in our 4th question, which is on all the nights we can eat sitting or reclining, but tonight only reclining. Sa'adia Gaon, I think, is the 9th century in Bavel. So he's got rid of his roast meat, already the custom to have roast meat, presumably did not had finished by that point in time. Right? Again, the Mishnah is 3rd century. Sa'adia, I think, is 9th century. So at some point in that 600 years, that custom of eating roast meat on seder had fallen by the wayside, but they're pointing out the mitzvah to recline. And Rambam, what does he have? And again, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch is probably 70, 80, maybe even more % directly from the Rambam. Right? He doesn't have everything the Rambam has, but Rambam is so much the basis of our halacha. So it's really interesting when we find times that we do things differently. Anyway, Kana ben Shoel. So the child asks, and the reader says, I don't really know what to do with that, reader says, but anyway, how is this night different? Other nights we don't dip even once. So that's right. Before we do dip once, then Sa'adia said we don't dip at all. And Rambam saying also we don't dip at all explicitly. We dip twice, whereas Rav Sa'adia is dipping once. And we're starting with the dipping. We eat matzah. So in Egypt, they were still having the meat thing. They were only eating roasted meat on Seder night, right? Again, Rav Sa'adia Gaon is in Bavel, Rambam is in the Israeli shul in Cairo. We only eat bitter herbs. We eat bitter herbs. But he's also got this fifth question about eating while reclining. So the Rambam's, the Yerushalmi's 4 questions is 3, the Rambam's 4 questions are 5. Okay. And now I want to finish with the Ma'aseh B'Rabban Gamliel. Yeah. So I forgot what sorry, this is not the Tosefta, this is what our Haggadah says, right? We talk about saying all night. Ma'aseh B'Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, for Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. We have this incident with the 5 rabbis. Shahayu Mesubim b'Bnei Brak. They were reclining in Bnei Brak. And they were talking about the exodus from Egypt all night long. Ad Shabal Talmidehim v'amru lehem Rabbeinu Egiya Zman Kriyat Shema Shachrit, until the students came and said, it's time to read the Shema in the morning. This, again, I put the wrong source, but it's from our Haggadah. This does not appear anywhere else in rabbinic writings, as far as I know. It goes on to say, right, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Harei ben Shivim Shana. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I'm like someone who's 70 years, and everyone understood why we say Yetziat Mitzrayim at night. That's a Mishnah in Brachot. But this introduction about the 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak, we don't know why these 5 rabbis were here. Rabban Gamliel wasn't here. Rabbi Tarfon was here. Rabbi Eliezer wasn't here. A lot of things. I gave a series of shurim one year before Pesach about these 5 rabbis. And we don't know why they're in Bnei Brak, or where Bnei Brak is, or even what Bnei Brak is. Here, Babylonian says he thinks Bnei Brak is a recliner chair. But anyway, this is just from here. But we have a a different, but similar thing in the Tosefta Pesachim, which says, Ma'aseh B'Rabban Gamliel v'Zkenim. Now, this might have been a rival seder happening with Rabban Gamliel and the elders, as opposed to Rabbi Akiva's, Rabbi Yeshua's gathering. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel had a big fight, as we know, 3 big fights. Ma'aseh B'Rabban Gamliel v'Zkenim she'yu mesubim b'beit Baitus ben Zunin belot. They were having their seder in the house of Baitus ben Zunin, whoever he is, in Lod, which is not nowadays. Lod and Bnei Brak are not so far apart. Hayu asukim b'hilchot Pesach kol halayla ad krot hagever. They were learning Hilchot Pesach all night long until the rooster crowed in the morning. Higbiu milifneim. They raised up the the window shutters of v'noadu, and they realized it was morning. V'alchule lebeit midrash, and they went to the Beit Midrash. And they said, Ezahi birkat Pesach. What bracha do you say on the Korban Pesach? Now, they've already finished their Seder. So, again, the difference between the rabbis in Bnei Brak, who are locked up in their house, talking amongst themselves, and kind of getting more into Aggadic type ideas. Here they're going to practical halacha, they're discussing in the Beit Midrash. So what bracha do you say? And they say, Baruch Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lechol Pesach. Blessed are you, God, who commanded us to eat the Korban Pesach. And I guess I'm saying it's not too late because they didn't have the Korban Pesach at that time. But if they would have had it, what would they say? Ezer birkat hazevach. And what bracha do you say on the sacrifice? Well, I guess any sacrifice, but also there was the Chagiga sacrifice that came with the Korban Pesach. You'd also bring. You'd say Baruch Hashem Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lechol hazavach. Blessed are you, who commanded us to eat the sacrifice, and that's how they dealt with their seder. That's it from me for this week. Hopefully, I'll be back next week, same time, same channel. If you have any questions, you can contact me as usual. And I think I want to talk about some of the more beautiful or more peculiar Haggadahs, but I might talk about the first printed Haggadahs as well, and how the printing press changed the world. Tune in next week to find out. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.